Hi, my name is Alex Fregger. Today I'm speaking with Ilyana Kadushin and James Harrell. Ilyana and James are some well known names in the podcasting, voice acting, and narrating communities. And while they've kind of cut their teeth, if you would, in larger markets like New York, they've decided to settle down here in sunny Salisbury, Maryland. So, without further ado, let's get into it, yeah? So, I guess my first question is, why did you get into podcasting and voice work?
Well, let's see. Those are two separate arenas. So I'll start with the podcasting first. James and I were having a conversation one day. This is back in 2016. We were hanging out with some friends in the Catskill Mountains, which is a beautiful area. And we were talking about ourselves as artists and human beings and all the things that we had done up to that point professionally. And we were talking about, was there a vehicle for us as artists and humans that we felt would more authentically express and help us communicate with the world what we wanted to talk about, what was important to us, reach out, connect with people. And I had loved podcasts. I'd been listening to podcasts for a long time, a self-professed podcast junkie, where I just democratized radio was so exciting to me, where because regular radio is controlled and podcasting felt more free. And I said to James, I want in. I think we have everything it takes to do this,
We do. Well, we'd had a professional studio anywhere we lived in Brooklyn and New York because we've been doing film score, working for advertising, doing corporate media. That makes sound bullet. um, so yeah, and plus we had a group of fantastic friends and people that we knew in New York. So artists, musicians, other people that were, community leaders and doing things in their community. And it was just a great way to have people come over to the house to see your friends and interview them and then talk about what they were doing. And that was the start of it.
Yeah, that was 2016. So we started, and then, when we relocated from New York to Maryland, we were talking with Delmarva Public Media and just about our content, and the fact that we were focusing on people who were making a difference and people who are running nonprofits. And I myself I'm executive director of a nonprofit called Stories Love Music, and I really respect the nonprofit sector. So I was like, I want to have people on and talk about how all these people are working hard and rolling up their sleeves. And so that was the impetus to get into podcasting. And we have not looked back, and we just love it. Voice acting came way before that. Voice acting, we were in New York, and I'd studied at NYU and was studying music and theater and acting and writing and producing. And I think it came out of, I was having a meeting with an agent about something in general about acting, and they sort of illuminated to me that voice acting was a thing. I didn't even at that point know that people just perform with their voices, and what did that mean. And so once I got in, I broke in doing commercials and advertising, and then sort of made my way through doing promos for television and video games and animation and audiobooks and on and on and on. And James and I have, done a bunch of voiceover projects in our studio, and it's an art form. I think a lot of people are very curious about it, and I think it seems very mysterious and interesting. And then very quickly, people realize that it's really hard and it's really challenging, and it's not as easy as it seems. It's a skill like anything else, like, knowing how to, build something using your voice is,
Yeah, in your head, you could be like, oh, I could do this for a living. I can read out loud. Then you get in front of the microphone, then you hear your voice up there, then you're thirsty, your lips are smacking, then you got marbles in your mouth. And because I do voiceover, I don't do it all the time, but I'll be in the booth like, ah. So I appreciate what Ilyana does, especially when she narrates audiobooks. So
Oh, so you do audiobooks as well?
yeah.
yeah. So audiobooks is just, like I said, I broke in by doing commercials and then sort of made my way through all the different arenas of voice performing, doing games and animation and working for Nickelodeon for a while, Nickelodeon Television. And then 2004, it may have been when I got an audition for an audiobook, and it turned out to be the Twilight saga by Stephanie Meyer. And I booked that, and I ended up narrating the whole vampire series. This is before they were even out in movies, but during the course of narrating the series, the movies came out, and James can attest, it totally changed my universe, because when you're aligned with something that is this giant
pop
cultural phenomenon, like the way Harry Potter is or whatever, where there's rabid fandom. I mean, I got a care package from a soldier in Afghanistan who would talk about listening to my books when he went to sleep, and he sent me like stuff. He was in the Navy or the Marines?
No, he was the Marines.
Marines.
So he was like he would be in a foxhole all day in Afghanistan. So at the end of the day, they would have their MREs, their meals ready to eat. So he sent her one of those. He sent her a bottle opener with his rank and his name on it. And I'm like, I hope he doesn't come like looking for you.
He sent a picture of himself with his guns, and James was like, should I be worried?
Yeah, I'm like,
I was like, I think he's just wanted to give gifts to show his appreciation. But that was just showing how far reaching, because when I started narrating books, I didn't know who listened to them. This was, back in 2000, obviously things have exploded. Now there's Audible, and now audiobooks are like $1 billion industry. But at the time I was like, who listens to them? And they were like, well, people that drive, that commute for work, and truck drivers and stay-at-home moms and all these people. And then I was like, oh, it's even beyond that. It's people around the world, people learning English, soldiers who've got PTSD that want to relax at night. So it's a very cool thing to be involved in. I'm very grateful. I've now since narrated over 100 books, and listen, telling stories is fun, and it's a really lovely thing, to be a part of. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I kind of explored, is it ACX? And I was looking in that, and it seemed like a lot of the offers were for like, it was money per purchase, right? Or whatever. So there was no upfront funding. It was, if you got big, then it was great. And it looked like online, a lot of people did that, and then they didn't actually get that many purchases. They put in, 100 hours.
I know what you're saying. It's like a royalty exchange.
Exactly.
ACX, that's because that's really an arena for independent authors and people that are self-publishing, which I think is, listen, young, people just getting first into the industry ask me about whether they should involve themselves with that. And I think it's just a great place to get started and get your feet wet, because independent authors and people publishing, self-publishing, are not going to have as big budgets, and they want someone that's willing to just to do it for the experience of it and make some money. But yeah, they do tend to work on that royalty structure, which, to your point, is only going to be really beneficial if something becomes a bestseller. We have worked with independent authors, people that have known me from my work and have reached out and were like, will you narrate my book? And will more independently, work with them and produce their books. But I think, listen, we're in a time now where the playing field has leveled, because people have equipment. If they have the tenacity and they're willing to learn the skills, they can produce things in a way that people were not able to do, 15 years ago. And so I think that that's a good thing, but it's also a double-edged sword, because it means that the market will be even more saturated. It'll be, it could make things accessible, but also more competitive.
It brings the price down on projects. So the people that have been in the industry for a long time that made a lot of money are now seeing very little. So, which could be frustrating. As a composer, it was great. You used to make a certain amount of money, and then just because everyone was doing it, if you wanted the job, you took what they had to offer. So
yes, James is a film composer and sound designer. James has done music for commercials and television shows and film scores. So he's a
And
very accomplished musician
yeah.
himself.
And when those jobs aren't happening, I'm a contractor, a landscaper. I've done interior design work. It's just like, this is the life of an artist. It's great when you get paid for your artistic work, but sometimes that doesn't happen for a while. So you move on to something else and then you come back, somebody will come at you with a film or a TV show. And then
Are there any commercial jingles or like scores from a movie I might know?
Well,
Or
yeah, there's some projects that you'd be familiar. I mean, more recently, James contributed some music to an Amazon Prime show called Hunters with Al Pacino. And
I did a theme song for him based on the Come Back to Jamaica, which is also like John Lennon, Do They Know It's Christmas?
Mhm.
But it was about Nazis that moved to Huntsville, Alabama to build rocket ships, because that's what happened after World War II. So we brought all
Wow.
the rocket scientists over here and they worked at NASA. But they made a show and Al Pacino was like this Nazi hunter in the 70s in like New York. And so it goes between like New York and Alabama, and it's good.
yeah, it's a crazy, episodic thing on Amazon. And then James did contribute a little music to like an indie film that was very, highly awarded film, Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. I don't know if
I've
you that one.
I've I've heard of it. I have a friend that's a film student up at Towson. And she is very into like indie films, and she's been trying to get me to watch that movie for the past while. So
Wow. Well, it's a beautifully made film. We know the director of that film, and it's very sweet. It's very heavy. It deals with some really heavy issues, but it's very, very well done. Um, I'll keep tooting your horn. Like James also did a great soundtracks for this film that was really funny and over the top about crazy soccer parents. Parents that are way too into their kids' soccer. It was called Bad Parents. It's been on HBO Go, but it had Janine Garofalo and like all these female comedians, Sherry O'Terry, and Kristen Johnson from Third Rock from the Sun, that really tall blonde. But it was about all these crazy soccer parents, and James did this really cool score for it that was kind of reminded me of like the way I would feel watching like a John Hughes, like an 80s nostalgic film where the music was very fun and emotional. So he did a really cool soundtrack to this movie, Bad Parents. But back in the day with advertising, he would do stuff that was more like advertising companies would be pitching ideas.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times they would hire a composer or a sound person like James just to create scores and soundtracks for things that may or may not go. They were like kind of demos of commercials. And
I used to do a lot of like have to rescore thing. Like every composer hates this. Like when a director or producer gives you something with a temp track in it, they're like, do you want a temp track? I'm like, no. But what happens is they fall in love with the temp track. Then they realize they can't license it because they don't have the money in their budget. So, I get like, can you rescore Public Enemy's Fight the Power? I'm like, yeah, I could do that. And it's fun because now I get to like take a whack at music that I normally wouldn't write myself. And then of course, if I'm going to create a Public Enemy Bomb Squad track, I'm going to like rap over it and put on my best Chuck D, so it's this ability.
And people are like, who's that rapping?
Yeah, nobody
James?
knows.
And he's like, it's me.
And they're like, what?
What?
And it's all out of cultural appreciation, growing up being a fan of hip hop, watching it evolve from like the 70s, 80s, 90s. So it's like the film soundtrack stuff is great because if sometimes a filmmaker wants like a certain sound, like maybe I want something that sounds, kind of African with some India melodies. And I'm like, yeah, I could do that. Or I can research and learn how the instruments are played, how everything is tuned and set, and then create a score to that. And I normally would have never done that. And then like in 6 months, I'll write a song that sounds something like that,
That's pretty cool. All right. So you talked about how you had gone from New York and then now you're in the Salisbury area, right? What was that like in that transition from kind of big city, big industry to a lot smaller of a market?
James and I spend a lot of time, we even talk about this on our podcast. We're very, open with people because we feel like when you talk about your process, it's helpful for people. This has been a big time of transition. And we ended up moving before COVID, but during COVID, a lot of people have been migrating around and moving from big cities. It's been a big time of flux and change. But when we talk about it, we talk about there's a thing that people that live in big cities get kind of lost in or locked in this loop of an idea that you can only make art or be creative or do your work in big cities. And I think that maybe you feel this way because it's certainly helpful when you're getting started in it to be in a city. I felt like because there were so many opportunities and that momentum and that being around so many colorful, interesting, creative people when you're getting started as an artist is very inspirational and it drives you to be your best and find out. But then you hit a certain point when you get more established maybe, or where you're at a different phase in your life, where then you realize, and today with everything being remote and mobile and we can work with somebody in Germany or we can work with somebody in California and all we need is a good internet connection and our equipment. And that suddenly the world became smaller in that respect, that you could connect with people and work. So then you realize, okay, it's not dependent on my location. So once we realized that and we let go of that preconceived notion, it was actually very relieving because it's been a big, James and I described moving from a big city to a more Eastern Shore as kind of like unplugging from the wall, like letting everything rest. Everything was plugged in and in really high gear and really forward momentum. And then we realized that we could take a breath and maybe create from a totally different mindset, that we didn't have to be in that kind of crazy city mindset to create that. And that in a way was a really good discovery.
Yeah, I was ready to go too. 30 years in New York City. And I mean, I had an incredible life there. I had a crazy life, and then almost 7 years ago, I gave up drinking and smoking and just was like, yeah, I don't need to be here anymore because I don't go out and party. I don't need to be on subways all hours of the night. And, you just get older, your priorities change. And we've always, been into nature, like escape the city whenever we could. Living in Brooklyn, we had a backyard, a front yard. I was composting and growing vegetables, also doing it in a neighbor's yard. So at least we had that. But then it was like, let's do this on a little bit bigger scale. So, we use the podcast now. This is our platform. So we want to take it on the road. We want to go to other communities, talk to other small cities and just do outreach work,
But yeah, it was definitely an interesting transition. And it's definitely like over time, you just start to keep unplugging. It was like when James and I first came down to the Eastern Shore, we'd catch ourselves if people moved at a slower pace. Yeah. We'd get really impatient with people. We'd be like, come on, people, time is money, let's go. And then we were like, why are we being so impatient? Oh, that's residual from our city where everything moved really fast and everybody moved really fast. And then you're like, whoa, slow your roll. Nobody else around here is in a rush.
Yeah, why is that cashier talking to that woman? Oh, because she's nice. Oh yeah, James, chill out, dude. Take a breath. People stop and smell the roses, and once you get outside of New York,
Yeah. I'll tell you, I'll go down to New York for a weekend every couple years, or even a week once. And I'll tell you, after a couple days, even a couple hours, I am just exhausted in New York City. I mean, I'm not from Salisbury. I'm from the Annapolis area. I kind of got DC, but DC compared to New York is just a completely different beast. And it must be so different. It must be the opposite, I guess, to come down to somewhere where it's a lot slower and you're like, let's go. So.
Yeah, it's refreshing though, because it's just the stimulus. I mean, there's a lot of things I miss about city life, the just there's so many things with culture and art and food and people that I miss. But this overstimulation and the where you just are around millions of people every day,
Yeah.
it's just, I don't miss that. And where it would take you 2 hours of commuting to get anywhere, now instead of doing that, we can spend our, the free time that we have being in nature and walking in nature and hearing our own thoughts, not being so loud.
Or going to the park and having lunch, like that's what I do now.
Yeah,
it's like
it's very different.
I'll pick something up. I'm gonna go watch the geese and the ducks and the herons, and give yourself that little moment of time just to decompress.
So if you see someone talking to ducks in the park, it could be James.
Well, I'll make sure I come over and say hi. So with coming to Salisbury, I noticed on your podcast that you were talking to a lot of locals. Did I just happen to find podcasts where you were talking to locals, or have you kind of more centralized on Salisbury, or?
We do a mix. So yeah, I would say we're almost we've had like 80 episodes. I want to say we're close to 80. And I would say that within those episodes, there's a variety. We sometimes talk to people, and now obviously with doing things via Zoom, we can talk to people from anywhere. I think the local aspect is really because there's certain series that we started. So we're talking about the Know I Know podcast. And on the Know I Know podcast, we have one series, for instance, is called Race and Community Esteem. And we started that even before we were in the area, but it's basically talking to people that are being leaders in their communities and building people up, making connections between people, building people's esteem, and as opposed to creating divisiveness, as opposed to creating, division. And so we've had leaders from the NAACP locally. We've had people that are just working on behalf of their community, and also leaders who are in the nonprofit sector, as I said, who are really working hard they saw a need in society or a problem in society, and they started an organization to meet it. We also have our Going Green series. And so we're very passionate now on the Eastern Shore, and being surrounded by such beautiful landscape. We're talking to people who are working at different environmental organizations. We're very passionate about people waking up and having a consciousness, whether it's stuff they can do in their own home to live more green and sustainably, to knowing about organizations. We have several episodes coming up on our show where we talk to people that work at the Chesapeake Bay Commission, at the Sierra Club, which is one of the oldest environmental organizations. We talked to a married couple, the Hastings, who are both environmentalists in their work and are married. And we, Josh and Alyssa Hastings, we wanted to talk to them about being a couple and both being really passionate about the environment. So we're not so much guided by local versus national, but more of like, yes, we want to cover both. We want to show what's happening locally on the shore, and then we'll sort of pull back the lens and say, let's look at a state level, let's look on a national level, let's look at a global. Because I think when you do that, it's some good variety. People are obviously going to care about local and national. So I think it's important to show both.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of, you said you were doing podcasts on local leaders. I do believe, I actually just learned about her. There's this woman, I think her name is Gloria, who's from Berlin and was actually a leader during the desegregation movement, and was one of the people that pushed for desegregation in Berlin before it was a national mandate. So I don't know if you've talked to her or know of her, but I think she's still around and she might be a cool person to talk to. So.
Well, I
So
appreciate that. Maryland, the more we interview with people, we realize that Maryland and the Eastern Shore, its history on race and segregation is very interesting. And that the Eastern Shore, we've been educated by our guests that the Eastern Shore was pretty slow on the uptake in terms of desegregation.
It was the 70s, right?
Yeah, it was like they were the last to the party. That a lot of the schools were not integrated, whereas in the rest of the country they were. There's also great civil rights activists that come from the Cambridge area. I'm sure you've heard of some of them. So Maryland, that's what's so great about doing these series, and you start scratching the surface and you realize that there's so many great people right here in your own state that have all this historical significance. And we have to, James and I were involved in a documentary we produced, and then James also did the score, which I sang on. It was called Separate But Equal. It won the 2011 HBO Best Documentary Award at the Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival. And the experience of working on that documentary, which was about Mississippi during legal segregation, is that we learned that we have to allow the older generations to tell the stories and to capture those stories. And it's our responsibility and your responsibility and all the generations to take interest and capture those while those people are still on the planet. Because if we don't capture their stories and then they are no longer with us and their stories kind of die with them, we're losing out on the history that can inform us and help us not make those same mistakes or learn from those historical things. So whenever I talk to people that are interested in journalism and podcasting, I'm always like, yeah, I don't know about you, but I feel driven to capture people's accomplishments and stories because it's like a time capsule,
And that's why we wanted, we've been talking about putting together something to make more of a mobile unit, like a studio, kind of, like a little work live thing in a transit van, just for a couple weeks, go hit some other areas, some other cities that are kind of like Salisbury or the surrounding area, and talk to the local people. For me, like being in New York, like there's a lot of decadence and opulence, and I got to work in real estate. So I got to work in multi-million-dollar condos, some really fancy places, and I'm not into that. And I'm like, I like dirt and growing vegetables and regular people that, like are just doing their life and trying to be nice. And so that's where I'm at. That's why I love being down here. New York was fantastic. I learned so much there, but it's like there's a time and place for everything and a time to move on. It's just hard when you're in New York because you think you have to live there forever, because you kind of started making it there, and it's like, no, let's take these skills and move on.
So I did find her. It was Gloria Richardson Dandridge, and she was from Cambridge.
Yeah, I thought maybe Cambridge. I hadn't heard of somebody in Berlin, but many people spoke to me about Cambridge, in particular as an area having a very sort of deep history of civil rights and
Yeah.
civil rights activism.
Looks like the Baltimore Sun literally wrote an article about her last month. But yeah, she's what I've heard of her has just been amazing things. So, do you have any tips or tricks of getting into the industry?
All right, I'll start. Podcasting, get good equipment, right? Get a good microphone, not a cheap one, because that's all you have. Get a good microphone, good set of headphones, and I guess just learn how to be a good interviewer, or like what kind of.
Well, I would also say why.
Yeah.
I would ask yourself the question, why do you want to get into podcasting? Because I think we're in a time right now where people are like, yeah, I want to try it. I think there's nothing wrong with trying something and then being like, you know what, this is not for me. Maybe I just wanted to try it to see what it's like. But there's so many people out there doing it. I think what's really important is to know why you're doing it. It's like what we were just talking about with those series about civil rights and race or environmentalism. I'm passionate about talking to people and talking to people who are making a difference. That's why I'm doing a podcast. So I think it's ask yourself, because if you have a strong reason for wanting to do it, that's going to be like the gasoline that will propel you to do it, because it's hard work. And so if you're just doing it because you think it's, could be cool, it probably won't last that long, because you won't have that drive to keep it going, because it takes some time to evolve it.
Also, the other thing is, like, now podcast is an oversaturated field. Like, everybody's doing it. Like, Joe Rogan probably makes the most money because he's been doing this for so long. Like, he set it up, and now all these other people are coming in. And yet when you're a celebrity, you already have an audience and a following. So it's not going to be much of a transition.
Same with Mark Maron. I mean, those are two, Mark Maron and Joe Rogan are guys that have been doing podcasting longer than most people will. But the point is, like, the long game.
Yeah, but also the other thing is, like, we did the podcast because this was another art form that interested us. We didn't go into it like, yeah, we're going to make lots of money, because we've been in the music industry, and it's like, you make money and you gig and do the whole thing. So it's like, we did it out of enjoyment. Like, do it out of the love first. And then if you start getting sponsors and advertisers, then, like, that's a bonus.
That's a plus.
That's a bonus. But, look at what's going on in this time. Like, now more people are listening to podcasts, right? People are at home or they're jogging. Create a podcast that is like, has depth. Like, it could have sound design and cool music, and it could be anything you want to talk about. It doesn't have to be an interview thing. Like, it could be an experience. Like, there's meditation podcasts, there's well-being podcasts.
So be creative. I think the thing with that is, like, good equipment, knowing why you're doing it. That would certainly help, and being invested in it for the long game, because it takes time to evolve it, for it to get distributed and get sponsorship and all that. And so that's what I'd say about that. Voice performance wise, listen, great voice performance is actually great acting, because it's acting. So my advice to people is always, if you've never taken an acting class or you've never taken a voice class, do that first, because then you'll be less inhibited and you'll be more in touch with yourself and what characters live in you and what your body can do and what your voice can do, so that by the time you go to actually attempt doing voice performing, you have some vocabulary for what it's all about. And I think it takes, having, again, a studio, because there's an expectation that you would be able to submit yourself for things in your own. So again, you'd need a studio, you'd need equipment, good equipment to do voice performance. And, a good demo and a site, a good website to put your demo on. And you have to represent yourself in a way where you're not trying to do everything, but you kind of start using your own instincts about what you would be most accessible for you, and kind of showing off those sides of yourself and your voice.
And voiceover is not about making funny voices at any time, or the announcer voice like this. Like, it's coming back in
a world
gone wild. Like, that's, because it sounds put on after a while.
Well, that was that movie, In a World.
In a World.
That was saying how that approach is sort of dinosaurish, and that today it's about being real, wanting real people to sound like real voices.
Pedestrian, like, you see the truck commercials, like, real people, not actors, like, that's not true. Why did you put that up there? But it's like, because people out in the world now want to look at advertising and see themselves in that world, right? That's the whole thing. Back in the 50s and the 60s, everything was glitz and glamour, and we all had to aspire to that. And that's not what's happening in this day and age.
But it's also because companies the other reason that existed is because companies didn't want to seem like they were selling, because when people feel like they're being sold to, they're gonna rebel, right? If you feel like somebody's selling you, you're like, you kind of want to tune it out. But if I connect with you on a real level, on a human level, and then I happen to make you want to drink this drink that I'm drinking, then I've done my job without making it sound canned, that canned speech. No canned ham.
And I look fabulous.
Of course. Of course. So So you mentioned earlier with podcasting sponsors and sponsorships. I've been having a conversation with our director of production over at DPM about the effects of sponsors on content and how they might guide you to talk towards certain things or make you shy away from talking about certain things. What's your take on all of that, and how do you navigate that field?
Well, and for our sponsorship so far, we decided that we would only sort of make requests of people that we had relationships with. Like that if we had either been knew about their business or their company, and felt like we had some sort of personal connection to them and we liked what they did and respected what they did, that then we would move into that sort of sponsorship relationship. And I think that was a good way of doing it, because then there's this understanding, there's this mutual respect. Obviously, if you move into the realm of a more detached, I'm just getting this product or this company to sponsor my show, and we don't really know each other, and it's like a little bit more of a cold, like they're just paying you to advertise their thing, then you could get into more of a thing where they could have some sort of say on what you're representing, and vice versa.
But that probably won't happen, because the whole part of being an independent producer is so that you don't feel like you have to go that avenue, to feel like you compromise yourself. And I speak on this because, like, a lot of my work for hire stuff, while it was great that I was making money doing music, it wasn't fulfilling, and it would become frustrating, and I felt like I was selling out. And at that time, that was like in smack dab of my alcoholism, and I didn't feel good about it. I just kept drinking. And then once I walked away from that, I'm like, I'm not going to compromise. We're going to do what we do, and people come to us because they like what we do, and that's who we work with. But like a corporate sponsor that would say like, oh, we'll give you X amount of dollars, but you have to gear your podcast towards that. No, that's not happening. Someone else, go ask somebody else to do that.
Well, that's what I mean. So yeah. We obviously are producing, we're the producers, the co-hosts. So we have that sort of independence to say, we're going to approach these kinds of people because they like what we do, we like what they do, and it's a mutual admiration sort of thing. And we want their support and they want our support. So obviously, that's a totally different ballpark than a lot of situations, I think, where people are getting sponsors and then the sponsors turn around and have a sense of control or try to control.
The money's enticing, and we all, everyone's like, yeah, that would be great. But then, I feel some people could feel like, this is not what I wanted the show to be about, when somebody else is telling you how they want to steer it because they can.
Well, what came out of that conversation, Alex? What was sort of the, what did you feel like the climate was?
Well, it seemed like it was a slippery slope. That if you start letting people kind of, I don't want to say push you around, but if you're scared to talk about, a certain thing happening in an industry because your sponsor is part of the industry, that's an issue. Not the lesson that came out of it, but a thing to think about was, have you guys heard of Podcasting 2.0? I forget the guy's name. Chris is going to hate me for that, but there's this guy that started with Apple and Steve Jobs when they first started podcasts. One of the guy that was kind of a founder of podcasting as a thing.
You're talking about Adam Curry, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's the VJ at MTV. That's where he got his start.
Exactly. So he's starting this thing called Podcasting 2.0, which is apparently like, instead of having a sponsorship, it's directly crowdfunded. But I see the issue with that being, you can't have everybody paying $5 per podcast, essentially, or donating $5 a month per podcast. So it was kind of like, how do you manage direct, funding by viewers or listeners while also not making it exorbitantly expensive just to listen to a few podcasts and be able to support them?
Yeah. And I think there's so the answer to that is kind of like everything else today. There's so many different avenues and choices. You could do the sponsorship thing where it's like companies and
Subscription
and
based.
or you can do what's another
Subscription.
choice is like a Patreon, or where someone is subscribing and they pay maybe $5 or $10 a month, and in exchange they get additional content and special incentives that are just for them. Or you go the crowdfunding is a little bit different than the subscription. Crowdfunding is saying, hey, we're doing this and we just want you to support it, and it's a little broader. So I think there's a lot of different ways to go, and I feel like it's going to depend on what kind of show you have, what kind of podcast, who would it appeal to. A lot of the times people that we would end up having sponsors, it would appeal to them because of what the content was that we were dealing with. There was a symmetry and an alignment because we were covering things that they thought were important and that they also believed in. And I think that everybody's got different principles and everybody's got different comfort levels. And so again, it's a learning curve when you start podcasting to kind of figure out what's going to be right for you and what you want to do.
I just, lately I've been in this popped up in the YouTube algorithms is a gentleman, Thomas Sowell, who's an African-American economist and author, and he's in his 90s. And he's very smart, intelligent person. And, they asked, like, what would you say to a young Thomas Sowell, like if he was in his 20s growing up in Harlem? He's like, acquire a skill that people want to pay you for, and this is just the podcast and music production. It's another skill that we have. So, and it's another vehicle to put us out in there, out into the world. So because of that, people are like, oh, can you do some ads for Wacomico Environmental Trust? Absolutely. And that, leads to money. It might not be the first thing, like I'm going to podcast and make tons of money, but it'll lead to other things. You're putting yourself out into the world. People are hearing how you conduct yourself with other people. And then it's like, oh, I might want to work with them. The entertainment industry, it's pretty much nepotism. It's like who because somebody.
That's not just entertainment industry. Yeah. It's a lot of industry.
Yeah, but the most of the music biz, because that's the big bright shiny thing that everybody wants to get into, and but it's like it's who I would have young composers like, how do you get these jobs? And I'm like, I would just know filmmakers.
Well, that was my point for sponsorship, is that relationship building. And it may not appeal to, like, if you're a young person, right, like super young right now and you're getting going, you may be like, oh, building relationships, I just want to do what I want to do. But you'll learn really quickly that you won't get as far unless you develop relationships with people. People get to know you, they respect you. They're like, oh, this person's cool. They seem really invested in this and they're in this for the right reasons. You know what? I'm going to do this, or I'm going to reach out to them, or I'm going to let them do this, or I'm going to give them this opportunity. That's really, really important when you're building your professional career and when you want to be in a community and respected in a community.
So speaking of sponsors and all that, do you see, so right now it seems like sponsorships are kind of the main vehicle for funding podcasts and other kind of like YouTube channels and that sort of thing. Do you see that as being or continuing to be the dominant force, or do you think that Patreon or crowdfunding or maybe something else completely different might become the next big thing?
I think it's going to be a mix. I think we'll continue to have sponsorship because there's businesses and organizations that I think will work in that way. But we are going to move into the world of subscription, whether it's Patreon or something else, because we do kind of want to not insulate. It's not about having a bubble with your audience, but people that like us and respect what we do and like our podcast and have been faithfully listening to us and interested in us. Like we want to make them feel like they're part of something cool and give them some, things that people,
some treats,
some bonuses. And so it's kind of like building a community with your listeners. And we would, like we record music and we do all sorts of things that we could give them access to that other people wouldn't.
Yeah.
So we would probably do a mix of all of those would be my answer to that.
And I think that like looking at the subscription base with like the crowdfunding and the Patreon, like I like that. I think that's a great way for any artist to get out there and, you know, like to have their friends and family help them out with small contributions. And that's the other thing. Like you can kick, you know, if you get like 1 million people to kick you $1, like there you go. You know, you don't have to ask for a lot. Might not happen, or if it happens one day, it's a pleasant surprise.
Well, one of the success cases was the artist Amanda Palmer.
Yeah.
She, you know, has always used crowdfunding and social media platforms to make her albums, to do her concerts. And she has, you know, like she's on Patreon, and I don't even know how many subscribers or, you know, she has, but all of her offerings are like $1, $3, $5, but she has so many supporters that even for that kind of nominal amount, she's funding all of her creative projects. So that's a really, you know, and crowdfunding has become, you know, obviously back in the day, it was like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, some of the sort of beginning crowdfunding where people were like, okay, wait a second. I want to do this thing. I want to invent this thing, or I want to do this project or whatever it is that someone's trying to do. And they're like, okay, what's holding me back? What's limiting me? Okay, well, I need to get it financed. Okay, well, I could sit around and wait for somebody to finance it or convince some, you know, or somebody gives me a green light, or I can have the initiative to, you know, put this out there and see. And what a testament to being able to pitch your idea and put it out there on those platforms and get people to finance you. Because today it's so saturated. I mean, everybody's crowdfunding from everything from their hospital bills to the films they want to make. Everybody's like, crowdfund me, crowdfund me. So it's so important that you know how to be articulate and that you know how to represent your well, because otherwise people are just going to be like, I can't take you seriously. You know, there's too many other people that need my donations, right?
All right. Well, I guess I really only have one last question, and you kind of mentioned it already, James. What's something you wish you knew before you got started?
All the emotional highs and lows of being an artist and having the opportunity to make large amounts of money and then watching months of tumbleweeds going by because there's no work, you know, like August in New York, everyone's out at the Hamptons, but you're like, I got to pay my cell phone bill, my rent. Just like, yeah, the highs and the lows of being an artist, a professional artist, like, just to manage that better, you know, it's crazy. And then you're in the city, you're excited. I wish I had knew a little more like just how to deal with that a little more gracefully at the time. So I dealt with it by going out, you know, and being crazy. So I would totally do that differently if I'd known.
Well, thank you very much. And then actually, could you just tell me a little bit about Stories Love Music?
Sure. Stories Love Music is a nonprofit. It's a 501c3 status, and we founded it in 2017. And it's a nonprofit that provides free creative engagement programs. And by creative engagement, I mean specifically music and storytelling to caregivers, to communities of caregivers, so that they can use it for their own stress management, to prevent their own burnout, and also to use it as creative tools in the caregiving that they do, specifically of senior citizens with Alzheimer's and dementia, the power of music on the brain, music when someone's losing their memory. There's been a lot of research already by neuroscientists and music therapists. So we are just walking down a path that's already been laid, but we're really focusing on the caregivers, as there's such a incredible population of people who work so hard and their job is so tough and they're so stressed out. So being able to offer them a program to teach them how to use music and storytelling. And James and I started that in New York, and we brought it to Maryland. And during COVID, we pivoted and brought the what was once an in-person program to now an online program so that people can do it from the comforts of their home and office. And storieslovemusic.com is the website where people can learn, about what we do.
And I just want to note, since we're kind of talking industry and business stuff, we had set out on doing this for like public service and civic duty. We just felt that we needed to go out and take our talents as musicians and performers and to go out for like an hour into like a senior daycare center or a Alzheimer's facility and to go do this work. And then it turned into something. People wanted to pay us for our time. And then the nonprofit came around so we could provide these programs. So, start everything out with good intentions, and then, like people will see what you're doing and they'll want to take care of you and help you out with what you're doing. So,
Well, thank you, Ilyana, and thank you, James, for speaking.
Oh, of course. It was so fun talking to you and talking to you about stuff that we love.
I know, a new person.
I really appreciate it. And thank you so much. If you'd like to hear more of Ilyana and James' work, you can check out their podcast at knowiknowpodcast.com, or you can follow them at Know I Know Podcast. That's NOIKNOW podcast. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.